Thank you all.
In 2013, the Queen welcomed her third great-grandchild, the much-anticipated Prince George, son of William and Kate. Now, all these years later, another George is now second in line to the British throne. His younger sister, Princess Charlotte, is third. She was born in 2015, and later that year, Queen Elizabeth became Britain's longest reigning monarch, overtaking her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. In 2016, the Queen celebrated her 90th birthday. That was a four-day event, honoring the Queen's deep involvement with the armed forces and giving the nation a chance to celebrate her life. 2018, the Queen watched on as grandson Prince Harry married the American actress Meghan Markle in a ceremony that brought glamour and Hollywood royalty to the House of Windsor and led them firmly into the 21st century. But about a year later, Harry and Meghan would famously decide to leave the royal family, move to America, and give a tell-all interview to Oprah Winfrey, which caused deep divisions within the family. In 2021, the Queen's beloved husband, Prince Philip, died at the age of 99. The nation mourned with the Queen, but COVID restrictions kept the funeral small. The image of the Queen sitting masked and alone in the church became the image of a country both in mourning and in lockdown. But as she had so many times before, the Queen persevered. From an early age, Queen Elizabeth was one of the most recognized royals and recognized women in the world. Nearly a third of the planet lived in the Commonwealth that she ruled. She managed to combine the truly regal with a countrywoman's simple pleasures, and she embodied old-fashioned values of virtue, faith, and self-restraint, honoring to the very end the pledge she had made when she was just 21.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
Martha MacCallum with an extraordinary look back at an extraordinary life. 70 years on the British throne for Queen Elizabeth II. Now begins a 12-day period of an elaborate schedule that will culminate in the funeral of the Queen, which we will get into in more detail as the minutes progress here on America Reports. But right now, over to Sandra.
The royal family announcing just a short time ago that Queen Elizabeth II died at the age of 96 peacefully at her Balmoral estate. Martha MacCallum joining us now, executive editor and anchor of the story. Martha, you have covered the royal family extensively for years now, and with her death, her son Charles becomes Britain's new king.
That's right, Sandra. This is obviously a very sad moment for people all around the world. She was a beloved figure, a respected figure, someone for whom people all over the world had a great deal of respect for her ability to keep calm and carry on, sometimes during the most difficult of times. But I think that one of the most significant things to think about, and that we all think about when she comes to mind, is what she said when she made that statement on her 21st birthday in Cape Town on one of her early trips as a princess. "I declare my whole life, whether it be short or long, will be devoted to your service." And she put herself second and her country first. And I think that that's the thing that people so deeply respect about her, especially in the age where we live in, where everyone tends to put themselves before everything. She never did that, and at great sacrifice at times to herself, even given all of the immense luxury that she lived in. She was in service to her country, and it meant absolutely everything to her and her family right after that. And you can see the people gathering here at Buckingham Palace as word starts to travel through that crowd and all across the world. I don't think there's a better known individual on the globe than Queen Elizabeth II.
You know, Martha, as we watch the crowds gather there outside of Buckingham Palace, just down at the end of the Mall, and I assume that now that the news of the Queen's death is being spread far and wide across London and the rest of the UK, that we'll see more people, many more people make their way down there. We saw an official from Buckingham Palace place something on the gates there, and apparently it was a copy of the official notification that was on the Royals' website that the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. But when you look typically at the reign of a monarch, particularly a monarch who is the head of state in a democracy, you know, we see that length of time on the throne measured in maybe a couple or 3 decades. But for her to be on the throne for 7 decades really is extraordinary in any moment in world history.
She's the longest reigning monarch. She surpassed Queen Victoria several years ago, just after the 60th Jubilee. And I'm also so mindful of the fact that she had that opportunity to celebrate that 70th Platinum Jubilee in June of this year, because you could see that although her schedule was a bit curtailed then, she came out on the balcony at the beginning and at the end to bookend those celebrations. And I think it was so fitting that she got to see the incredible outpouring of affection for her when she stood on that balcony, and to see these enormous celebrations with at night, her face in all different decades across the front of Buckingham Palace celebrating her. So I think it's a very good thing that she got to witness all of that so close to her own passing. And it's, you're going to see, there was a concern that when this happens, that London might become full to capacity, that there might simply not be any room left for people in the city. And I think that's what you're going to start to see happening here in the next hours and days as we begin this 10-day period. And just one other thing to mention, this process is called London Bridge. Her father's passing, King George VI, was referred to as Hyde Park. It's essentially a code word that signifies that the monarch has passed and that the process is now set to begin. It's a process that has been planned for since the 1960s for Queen Elizabeth, and you're going to see an extraordinary, methodical carrying out of exactly who informs whom and at what time. The Prime Minister would have been informed. It's highly likely that the Queen passed several hours ago because this process needs to sort of happen in a very methodical way. And we all of that responsibility very, very deeply and seriously, and yet also be accessible to the people and to find that middle ground. She hosted those garden parties. She didn't have them this summer, but I think she's hosted them every summer since the beginning of her reign, or in the late spring. And this year, some of Charles and William and Kate stepped in to take over those responsibilities. But by all accounts, you know, a nice, warm sense of humor, an ability to put people at ease. And I think that one of the reasons that you do see this outpouring of affection, and not everyone in the UK is a monarchist, but my guess is going to be that even some of those, you know, diehard Republicans who want the monarchy to end will find moments in the coming days to respect the life of this woman, because she really did stay out of the political fray and represented the nation as a whole and the heart of the nation as a whole. And it, you know, it has had its very difficult times, and she has fought really hard to put all of that in the forefront, because I would assume, because she knows that it does mean a lot to so many people in the United Kingdom. It's a cultural sort of flag of patriotism that they represent, the love of the country. And that is separate in this entity, in this institution, than the political fray. So I think a lot of people appreciate that they can get to separate those things and love their country through this mechanism and keep it separate from the very rough political fray that lies beneath it.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned London Bridge, which is the code name for what will unfold over the next 12 days or so, culminating with the Queen's funeral, which will probably be about 10 or 11 days from now, depending on when exactly they put this all into place. The first thing that will happen, Martha, I guess tomorrow, is that the Accession Council will meet and officially declare Charles to be the king. This will not be a coronation. That would come later. And then the Queen's remains, because she is at Balmoral Castle, will be transported either under Operation Unicorn by train through the countryside and down to Westminster Hall, where she will eventually lie in state for 3 days. Or if they don't take her by train, and there you see the British flag at half-staff over Buckingham Palace, she would be transported by plane. But at any rate, she will end up at Westminster Hall, where 24 hours a day for 3 days, people will be allowed to come in and pay their respects to the Queen. And as we saw when her mother, the Queen Mother, died several years ago, so many people from across the nation came to pay their respects. I can't imagine what that lying in state is going to be like for Queen Elizabeth.
It will be extraordinary, John. I can guarantee that. And I'm looking back at a piece that was very interesting that was written several years ago in The Guardian, entitled "London Bridge is Down: The Secret Plan for the Days After the Queen's Death." And it details some of what we've gone through already today. There will be bulletins from the palace, but not many. And it goes in to say that it will be along the lines of the Queen is suffering from physical prostration, you know, that they would characterize the fact that they believed that she was perhaps on the end of her journey, that it was coming to a close, so that people would start to prepare for this. On her passing, her eyes will be closed and Charles will be king. His siblings will kiss his hands. The first official to deal with the news will be, and this name has changed since this article was written, it is now Sir Edward Young, the Queen's private secretary. And he has stepped into that role. And he has a knighthood. He has been in this role. Planning this funeral is one of the biggest jobs of the Queen's secretary. And she has been intimately involved in selecting the music. So they already know whether or not she will be coming by train, since she was at Balmoral, or whether the body will be brought back to London by plane. But all of these details will be coming out in the coming hours. But all of this has been mapped out in great, great detail. But it's also a family story. And Charles is 73 years old. And today his mother passed, and he became the King of England. He's the longest waiting in line prince in history. And there you see the statement at Buckingham Palace, where we've seen the births and the weddings placed on that same board. And today you see the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. And I would just say, before I toss it, the King and Queen consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. So tomorrow, Charles and Camilla, who is Queen consort, which was designated by Queen Elizabeth not that long ago, and that fraught history is well known, and we'll talk more about that in time. But they will return as King and Queen consort. So this is an enormous moment for the family, and a moment of grief and a moment of looking forward as well, but mostly a moment of family grief.
Just an update coming from the BBC right now that the Prime Minister is expected to make a statement. The last few moments, staff had carried a podium onto Downing Street after Buckingham Palace announced the news of the Queen's death. The Union flags, as we just noted, have been lowered to half-mast, and the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is expected to speak shortly. All of this, as you mentioned, there will be serious protocol that has been put in place for quite some time, Martha. The UK will enter a 12-day period of national mourning. The Queen's body will be taken to lie in state in Parliament's Westminster Hall until her funeral takes place. These preparations, Martha, have been underway for a long time. And wow, has she proved anyone wrong who thought she might have passed earlier. 96 years old. What a life she lived, Martha.
Yeah, she had great genes. Her mother lived to be 103. Her father, of course, died at a young age. But she was in very good shape. Until not that long ago, she was still riding horses and driving and going out for walks with her dogs. She's clearly had a difficult past year, I would say. I think that post-COVID, which she had in the spring, we saw a drop in her weight. She looked much more frail, I would say, after that. And I don't know how much we'll learn in time of any underlying illnesses, but these are things that really have not been discussed, other than the fact that she had mobility issues, which was clear during the Jubilee, and good days and bad days, like a lot of people in their 90s you would expect to have. But she had just an indomitable spirit and energy and optimism about the future. And she talked about that at the Jubilee, about how optimistic she was about the future. And let's face it, the United Kingdom is going through some very, very difficult times. Economically, they're in very tough straits. The pound is extraordinarily weak. All of these elements that need to be dealt with. No doubt she discussed some of this with Liz Truss the other day, the new prime minister, and I think it was probably very important to her to get that piece of business done, to meet with Truss, to give her the invitation to form a government, which is the tradition that is always in existence between the ruler, between the reigning monarch and the prime minister. So that was her real last piece of business, was giving the invitation to Liz Truss to form a government. And no doubt that is something that this prime minister will remember for the rest of her life, and feels quite deeply about the responsibility that lays in front of her right now, because she will be overseeing much of this process and how her country responds to it.
Just want to note that Speaker Nancy Pelosi here in the United States has ordered the flags at the U.S. Capitol to be flown at half-staff due to the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. So all of this we have just learned in the past hour. Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96. Martha, we know you're going to go get ready to cover this on your show, top of the 3 o'clock hour Eastern time, as we look live at the flag flying half-staff there at Buckingham Palace in London. John?
Yeah, and we know that, as you said, Nancy Pelosi has ordered the flag at the Capitol building flown at half-staff. We have not yet heard from the White House as to whether or not the flag will fly at half-staff there. I imagine it will, and whether the president will issue an order to have the flag flown at half-staff at federal buildings around the nation. Fox News contributor, National Review Institute fellow Douglas Murray joins us now. And Douglas, this is a moment that obviously was going to be inevitable, because everyone dies at some point. Queen Elizabeth II delayed this as much as she possibly could. But your thoughts at the news of the passing of the Queen at the age of 96?
Yes, I mean, for everybody, I think, around the world, but especially in Great Britain, it's a moment of unbelievable sadness and a moment of extraordinary transition in the life of the nation. For most of us, for our entire lives, we've known only the reign of Elizabeth II. It's important for people to understand, as I think mentioned earlier in the hour, that she stands above politics. The monarch reigns over politics and over the nation. And at great times of national crisis, it's the Queen, the monarch, that we've looked to. And you just think recently with the COVID crisis, it was the Queen and her reassurances to the nation that really were what people wanted to hear. Of course, now the monarchy is an extraordinary institution. Queen Elizabeth II was one of its greatest exponents, one of its greatest defenders, one of its greatest emblems. But the monarchy continues, the crown continues, and of course, we now have a new king, King Charles. This is an extraordinary transition. There will be a deep feeling of public mourning in the UK and I think around the world, and not just for the Queen herself, but also for what she represented and what she represents still. Devotion to country, devotion to other people, stoicism, courage in the face of adversity, a feeling of selflessness, let's say, of putting others first, putting the country first, most of all. And I think many people around the world will recognize in those virtues something which have passed to a great extent, but which mean an enormous amount to many of us still. So yes, it's a very significant time in the life of the nation.
World leaders are, comments from world leaders following her death are pouring in from around the world. French President
world leaders, and particularly British leaders, constantly called on her source of not just knowledge, but also wisdom. We saw just in the last couple of days, perhaps her last public duty was being with Liz Truss as the new Prime Minister and seeing the outgoing Prime Minister. And Prime Ministers in the United Kingdom in particular, but world leaders as a whole, were always acutely aware with Her Majesty that here was somebody who, her first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill. She saw her nation, indeed the world, through the worst possible times. She was the link back to that greatest generation. Remember that when Victory in Europe Day came, World War II came to an end, Her Majesty was on the balcony of Buckingham Palace with her father, the late Queen, and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and also with Winston Churchill. Many people not only valued, as I say, her store of knowledge, but the wisdom that came from knowing that nations and peoples go through terrible times and come through them. That there are things above politics, remembering the significance of the nation, of service to the nation. These things and much more were called upon and admired and respected, I know, by American presidents, by French presidents, by leaders around the Commonwealth and around the world. It's not going to be surprising, I think, that in the coming hours and days we're going to hear from a quite bewildering array of people, both heads of state and also just the many millions of people whose lives were touched by Queen Elizabeth, the late Queen Elizabeth. Yeah, we're going to hear a lot of tributes, and they'll be very well deserved.
Yeah, among them, Mitch McConnell, who just released a statement saying, "Today, all Americans stand with our great friends across the Atlantic in mourning the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The British people's loss is the entire world's loss. We Americans join our friends in prayer, in grief, and in gratitude for such a remarkable leader and such a successful reign." I mean, it's emblematic of the special relationship that the United States has with Britain, considering the storied history that we have with that country and with the monarchy going back to the middle part of the 1700s. We do know that the Prime Minister is going to be speaking at some point in the next little while. A podium has been set up out front of number 10 Downing. We were, according to London Bridge, which is the official program to run after the Queen's passing, it called for King Charles to make an address to the nation at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock has come and gone in the UK. Do you expect that we will hear from King Charles today, or if that won't happen until tomorrow, Douglas?
I would expect we'll hear from him fairly soon. It's going to be very important that this sense of continuity is kept in mind. You know, on the death of a monarch in the UK, they say, you know, the Queen is dead, long live the King. And there will need to be, I think, a statement from the now King to reassure the nation. Of course, Queen Elizabeth was his mother, so he's lost his mother as well as the monarch. But I would expect that we will hear from him. I think there will be great public sympathy and support for him, and it will be very important that this transition into a very new era is done steadily and with great care, because I think a lot of people will be experiencing great shock as well as sadness at the news.
If you could stand by with us, Douglas, thank you very much for joining us as we enter a new hour here, just moments after learning of the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, dead now at the age of 96.
The fundamental concepts which have inspired both the United States and the nations of the Commonwealth are the same. As between individuals, freedom, honest dealing, tolerance and justice under the rule of law. As between independent nations, free and sincere cooperation in the search for a just and lasting peace for mankind. Let us pursue these ideals with faith and determination, so that 350 years from now, our descendants will be as proud of us as we are of our forefathers.
A young Queen Elizabeth in 1957 on her first trip across the Atlantic, the first British monarch to set foot in the same United States that waged bloody war to escape the crown's clutches so many years ago.
But on that day, as throughout her entire reign, the Queen's focus remaining on the bonds that bring our nations together and the common goal of liberty for us all.
Now just past 7 in the evening in the United Kingdom, ending a dark and rainy day, now turning into a somber night, with word in just the past half hour that England's longest-serving monarch, the world's longest-serving monarch for that matter, Queen Elizabeth, has died. Hello and welcome to the second hour of America Reports. I'm John Roberts in Washington. What an afternoon, Sandra.
Sad day indeed, John. Great to be with you. I'm Sandra Smith in New York, by the way, as world leaders continue to weigh in on the loss of Queen Elizabeth II. Ukraine's President Zelensky extending his condolences to Britain and the Commonwealth for what he calls an irreparable loss of the Queen. The palace announcing the Queen passed peacefully this afternoon at her Balmoral estate there in Scotland. The royal family gathering there throughout the day for a final goodbye to Britain's longest-serving monarch.
Crowds have been gathering all day outside Buckingham Palace, as you see the live pictures there, as news of the Queen's dire health spread. And now that her announcement of her passing has happened, we expect that more people will be gathering outside there as well. An unfamiliar moment in a nation where nobody under age 70 has ever lived without Queen Elizabeth as their king. Think of it that way.
Yeah, and just 2 days ago, the Queen meeting with the new Prime Minister, British Prime Minister Liz Truss, for what was likely the final official picture of the 96-year-old monarch.
We have got coverage throughout the hour. Greg Palcott in London is joining us. And Greg, I don't know if you have it. I trust you do. A statement from King Charles just moments ago at the moment of his passing of his mother.
Absolutely, John, Sandra, a very sad time here in the UK, a sad time around the world. And yes, just in the past, 3 or 4 minutes, we've gotten a statement from, yes, King Charles. Let me read it to you here. A statement from His Majesty the King at the time of the Queen's death. The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms, and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection which the Queen was widely held. Back to you.
Greg,
All right.
Prime Minister speaking now. Let's go to her live.
It was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her. She ascended the throne just after the Second World War. She championed the development of the Commonwealth from a small group of 7 countries to a family of 56 nations, spanning every continent of the world. We are now a modern, thriving, dynamic nation. Through thick and thin, Queen Elizabeth II provided us with the stability and the strength that we needed. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. Her life of service stretched beyond most of our living memories. In return, she was loved and admired by the people in the United Kingdom and all around the world. She has been a personal inspiration to me and to many Britons. Her devotion to duty is an example to us all. Earlier this week, at 96, she remained determined to carry out her duties as she appointed me as her 15th Prime Minister. Throughout her life, she's visited more than 100 countries, and she has touched the lives of millions around the world. In the difficult days ahead, we will come together with our friends across the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and the world to celebrate her extraordinary lifetime of service. It is a day of great loss, but Queen Elizabeth II leaves a great legacy. Today, the crown passes, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, our new head of state, His Majesty, King Charles III. With the King's family, we mourn the loss of his mother, and as we mourn, we must come together as a people to support him, to help him bear the awesome responsibility that he now carries for us all. We offer him our loyalty and devotion, just as his mother devoted so much to so many for so long. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
And of course, it was just Tuesday that she appointed the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, during a meeting at Balmoral, which is now likely to be the last photograph that we'll see of Queen Elizabeth II prior to her death. John?
Yeah, and in that photograph, I mean, she obviously appears frail. I mean, what 96-year-old wouldn't? But also at the same time, she was beaming. She looked to be in good health, and now 2 days later, she's gone. Joining us now is Bret Baier, chief political anchor and an executive editor of Special Report. Obviously, this is going to factor big in your program this evening. You know, it's extraordinary because I grew up in Canada, which is a Commonwealth country, and I've never known any other ruler other than Queen Elizabeth. And you get a sense of how long she's been on the throne, because when she ascended to the throne, Joseph Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union and Harry Truman was president.
Yeah, it's truly amazing if you think about the reign. We talk about the longest reign for a monarch, really, across the world. You think about how she was on the throne throughout the UK's efforts, as you look at the picture of her welcoming in Prime Minister Truss and establishing her as the 15th Prime Minister to sit in that seat. But she, Queen Elizabeth II, was on the throne as the UK rebuilt from World War II, to your point. And she was on the throne when they entered the EU and when they left the EU in Brexit. She has seen amazing things over those decades on the throne, but managed to do it in a nonpartisan way, in a way in which her feelings about partisan politics inside the UK really never were seen. She advised prime ministers, she advised privately, but we never really got a sense, unless it was put out by the royal family, exactly how she felt. You know, one of the things that is going to come in coming weeks, not right away because of this, is the Northern Ireland back and forth, the protocol in the wake of Brexit. The Irish Taoiseach, the Prime Minister there, just put out a statement saying the Queen's reign was one of historic duration, immense consequence, and a focus of respect and admiration around the world. Our world is a poorer place for her passing, but a far richer and better place as a result of her long life and enduring contribution. I didn't say it with the Irish brogue, but you can get the sense of that.
As we look there live outside Balmoral Castle, where her family rushed to be by her side, say their final goodbyes in the hours prior to her death. This statement by His Majesty the King at the time of the Queen's death, Brett, it is just absolutely beautiful when you think about, obviously, him losing his queen, but also his mother, Charles. The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, a moment of great sadness for me and all the members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms, and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning, Charles says, and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. You know, Brett, the New York Times just put out a photo of Buckingham Palace and a double rainbow that they're reporting shimmered across the crowds gathered outside the palace when the news of Queen Elizabeth II's death broke. After a hush, people broke out in God Save the Queen, Brett.
It's pretty telling, and those pictures, I'm sure, are going to light up different television networks throughout the UK and also on papers and broadcasts. You know, the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, saying that Queen Elizabeth II was the rock upon which the modern UK was built. Think about 70 years visiting more than 100 countries around the world and the impact that this person had. How many people around the world knew who she was? Probably more than any other single person in the world. So this will be a process of mourning for the UK, but they've been preparing for this for quite some time. Now King Charles will make his way around the UK over 4 days, we're told, and all of the pomp and circumstance will come out, you know, in coming hours. But the big coronation for King Charles will come months later. The big funeral will come probably weeks later.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at history, the last time there was a coronation in England, it was June 3rd of 1953, and that was about 16 months after King Charles VI had died. So the coronation is something for another time, but tomorrow Charles will travel to London, where the Accession Council will meet and officially proclaim him to be the King of England. And then, as you mentioned, he will embark upon a tour where he'll go visit Scotland, he'll visit Northern Ireland, he'll make his way around the country to accept messages of condolence from the local governments there and to give a tour as the new King of England. And the Queen will lie in state at Westminster Hall. And then we will have the funeral, which will occur, I believe, on the 10th day, and then the burial on the 12th day. So when you look at what's about to unfold in London, I mean, the last thing that we can remember is the funeral of Princess Diana. This will eclipse even that.
Exponentially. Exponentially. I mean, obviously the emotion around Diana's death and the suddenness of it, this had been planned for, but this will, as far as the pomp and circumstance surrounding it, the preparations for it, will exponentially be bigger. And you can imagine world leaders coming from all over to express condolences and to be a part of that ceremony. It's interesting if you just look at the politics of this moment. Liz Truss takes over as Prime Minister in a time when the UK is in trouble financially. As far as energy is concerned, she had a really heavy lift as she steps into this job, having been essentially the foreign secretary in charge of foreign affairs, and now has to deal with the domestic, not only the troubles, but also handling this effectively as saying goodbye to Elizabeth II.
I should mention here, just before we go back to Sandra, we've obviously seen other funerals as well. Prince Philip last year, as well as the Queen Mother, Princess Margaret. But I mean, when I was talking about the last big funeral,
Impact.
The one with so much impact would have been Princess Diana.
That's right.
And also an important note, an observation by our own Chad Pergram in his note earlier, Brett, as we were talking earlier about Queen Elizabeth was a huge study of American history, a huge study of the Constitution, starting at a very young age. And Chad is making the note that she spoke to a joint meeting of Congress, 1991, Brett, the only British monarch to do so. It was May 1991. Prince Philip sat at her side. As he has always said, all the way up until his death, he believed his role was always to support the Queen. And during that address, she spoke about the Gulf War, which the U.S., UK, and other international coalition had just entered into to liberate Kuwait after the invasion of Iraq. Elizabeth spoke about the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom, saying, quote, "The best progress is made when Europeans and Americans act in concert." And then on the Senate floor this morning, Brett, Chad notes that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said the Queen was, quote, "an exemplar of steady leadership." He added that Elizabeth changed the world. And Brett, as you know, Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, has ordered the flags at the Capitol to be lowered half-staff to honor the late Queen.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of reaction from lawmakers, from the administration, obviously from President Biden and the First Family. This is a figure that will obviously have impact around Washington because of her long history. She was feted at a state dinner at the White House, and Nancy Pelosi's words, over 7 decades on the throne, Her Majesty was a pillar of leadership in the global arena, a devoted friend of freedom. And that basically sums it up.
All right, Brett, thank you very, very much for joining us as we continue our coverage here. A live look outside Buckingham Palace. That is one view of the flag flying half-staff there as the crowds continue to gather and say their goodbyes to the Queen. Steve Hilton joined us top of the last hour, host of Next Revolution on Fox News. Steve, we continue to see world leaders, reaction pouring in from all corners of the globe.
You know, Sandra, it's been an amazing feeling. An hour ago, as you said, we spoke. I had lots to say about the Queen and her reign. Your producer said, could you stand by in case we hear the worst? I said, of course. But I didn't imagine that it would happen because it's the Queen and she will just go on forever. And so it just, when I heard the news, I can tell you, I let out this howl of anguish. And it takes me to a point that many have made. Brett made it, Doug Murray, Martha made the point very well, that regardless of your views on the institution of monarchy, I've always been against the institution of monarchy. That's why I'm so proud to be an American now. But regardless of your views about that, this person, this incredible public servant, transcended all of that because you could see that all she cared about was her country, representing her country, doing her duty, doing it with dignity through everything that happened. And so I think the grief that people will be feeling right now in the UK, around the world, is not just for the person. Of course, it's incredibly painful for anyone to lose their mother, and that was reflected in King Charles's statement. But the grief for the loss of someone who embodied so much that is good and admirable about the world we want to see and the way we want people to behave in that world, and those virtues that seem to be, in many senses, disappearing. That's why it feels so painful. That's why I think it's going to be such a huge, huge shock around the world, because of she was so indomitable. That's a word that's been used. It just feels unbelievable that she's gone. It really does, despite the fact that, you know, with that statement that we were all reacting to earlier, we've been preparing for this news ever since her illness, you know, really, roughly a year ago. people have been preparing for this, but it still feels like such a shock.
You know, Steve, looking at a statement from former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who I believe traveled to Balmoral with Liz Truss for that ceremony to meet the Queen. Wave after wave of grief is rolling across the world from Balmoral, where our thoughts are all with the royal family and breaking far beyond this country and breaking here in the United States as well. The flag being flown at half-staff over the Capitol. We probably would expect President Biden to announce that the flag will fly at half-staff over the White House and federal buildings as well. And Congress is going to draft and pass a bereavement statement, we're told, on Tuesday. You know, I said this to Brett, that you get a sense of just how long the Queen has been on the throne when you consider that Joseph Stalin led the Soviet Union at the time of her coronation. Harry Truman was the president here in the United States. And when you know, we're looking at Balmoral Castle now, but when we had that picture of the roof of Buckingham Palace up there, I remember not too long ago, Brian May, the guitarist from Queen, and there you see it there, up on one of those parapets during one of the many Jubilee celebrations for the Queen, playing with his famous red special guitar, God Save the Queen. And I know that you probably did this as well, Steve, but during my entire youth at elementary school, every morning we would say the Pledge of Allegiance and sing God Save the Queen.
That's exactly right. We sang God Save the Queen, and it was played, and you'd stand up, and there she was, and she just goes on. And there are so many memories as I think about and reflect on her life and in a personal sense. I mean, you just reminded me of something that I hadn't even been thinking of, which is that for the 2012 Olympics, just before I moved here to America, I was working in the Cameron administration, and I was the point person, as it were, for the opening ceremony of the London Olympics, working with Danny Boyle, who was the director, who was the creative director, and putting all of that together. And of course, the most memorable part of that whole ceremony was the opening, where the Queen was greeting Daniel Craig and his character as James Bond, and then he took her in the helicopter, and there she was. And of course, in the end, we knew it was a lookalike parachuting in to the stadium. And I remember talking to him about that plan, and had he discussed it with the royals? Oh, you need to help me with that. And we went through this whole process, and we couldn't quite imagine that he'd be able to pull it off, and that she would agree to it. But of course she did it, because she knew how amazing that would be and how the whole world would remember that moment. And she had this fantastic sense of an understanding and a connection with people and with the country, and a sense of humor. And although she had that dignity, Martha was speaking to this earlier, you know, she had that sense of dignity and majesty about the office, but also that ability to have some fun, to relate to people, to have a sense of humor. And all these things, all these reflections and memories will be pouring out over the next few days, of course. But in the end, I think it really is. I know this is such a cliche to even say this, that when we talk about the passing of an era, she embodied so much of a particular spirit. And in the UK, that I think a lot of people will be thinking back particularly to the wartime spirit, that sense of determination and grit and resilience. She really represented that better than anyone. And I think that's why this will be felt so strongly everywhere.
Steve Hilton, thank you for sharing your heartfelt memories of the
Thanks,
Queen.
Steve.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, we are joined now by Shannon Felton-Spence, a Royals expert and former head of communications for the British Consulate General. Thank you very much for staying with us here. There is a brand new statement by another U.S. president, President George W. Bush, and his wife, Laura, saying, "We're honored to have known Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. She was a woman of great intellect, charm, and wit, spending time at Buckingham Palace and having tea with Her Majesty and her corgis is among our fondest memories of the presidency." Queen Elizabeth ably led England through dark moments with her confidence in her people and her vision for a brighter tomorrow. Our world benefited from her steady resolve, and we are grateful for her decades of service as sovereign. Americans in particular appreciate her strong and steadfast friendship. Laura and I join our fellow citizens in sending our heartfelt condolences to the royal family and the British people. And you are reminded that during her reign, there have been 15 prime ministers, 14 U.S. presidents, 7 Roman Catholic popes. Your memories of the Queen?
Well, first of all, my deepest condolences to the King and the entire royal family and the people of Britain. This is such a time of sorrow and mourning, and I hope that they know how deeply this loss is felt in America and throughout the world. I was just in the UK for the Platinum Jubilee in June, and people were exuberant. The energy was like nothing I've ever seen. The streets of London were just full, shoulder to shoulder, of people from around the world showing up to celebrate 70 years on the throne. And I truly have never seen anything like it. She will be so deeply missed.
In terms of how deeply missed she will be, the sadness, obviously, that this is going to precipitate in London and beyond in the UK is just incalculable at this moment. But we have ceremonies that are coming up over the course of the next 12 days that are going to pay such tribute to this queen that the sadness, no doubt, I think will turn to celebration at some point, will it not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 70 years on the throne, the world's longest reigning monarch. It is something to celebrate. So they have a process for this. We will go into a period of mourning of about 10 days, and we will have the funeral. And then we have an exciting transition to look forward to. There's a new king, God save him. And, this is what the crown does. The crown passes down, the crown remains.
Still waiting on an official statement from the current U.S. president as reaction continues to pour in from world leaders. Former U.S. President Donald Trump also sharing his tremendous loss and sadness on the passing. He and Melania deeply saddened in a statement to learn of the loss of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Together with our family and fellow Americans, we send our sincere condolences to the royal family and the people of the UK during this time of great sorrow and grief. And you're remembered of those images of his visit to see the Queen. And this was such an important part of her reign, to continue all those relationships, in particular with the United States and the many presidents during which she saw under her reign.
Absolutely. So there was a poll actually in the last couple of weeks from the Association of Marshall Scholars and Emerson College that asked Americans for the next generation, how important will the monarchy be for UK-US ties? And remarkably, the poll found that 64% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 34 think that for the next generation, the monarchy will be as important or even more important than it is now. And that is a testament to her legacy. She has watched Western European monarchs fall and lose significance her entire reign. And to see that the special relationship is that strong, that we know that the monarchy will be important to our alliance and our friendship, it's just remarkable.
Yeah, Shannon, we're just getting a response from former President Obama and Michelle Obama saying from the day of her coronation 70 years ago, the first one ever televised to this moment, as countless tributes being posted online in her honor, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth has captivated the world. Today, Michelle and I join so many others who are celebrating her life and mourning her passing. It is rather extraordinary when you think of the violent history that this nation had with the British monarchy so many years ago, how beloved a British monarch actually became.
Absolutely. Well, I was just thinking when you were speaking with Steve about singing the British national anthem, God Save the Queen, at school every day, and I'm reminded that actually Our Country 'Tis of Thee is the same tune of God Save the Queen. We are bound to each other in friendship and in history and in democratic values, and that's just a fact.
Much will be made about who made it there to say their goodbyes. Of course, we kept track of her children, her grandchildren who flew to be by her side. We saw that happening earlier today. Obviously, William and Harry making their way there. We quickly learned, while we thought that Meghan had been also along with Harry, that she was not. But her family was so important to her, and no one will really ever know. I'm sure many stories will be told about how she tried to mend that relationship towards the end with Harry and Meghan distancing themselves from their family.
I don't think that there's much to be made of Meghan originally announcing that she was going to Balmoral and then saying that she wasn't. I actually just think that Kate Middleton did not go, and so they understood that it was the proper thing to do to just send the boys. But listen, it's been a rough couple years for the Queen with the Duke of Edinburgh passing last year, the pandemic, Harry and Meghan leaving. It's been a very high-stress time for the whole world, but even inside the palace walls, just in her own family, it's been quite difficult.
You know, Shannon, we saw during the Silver Jubilee, or the Platinum Jubilee, rather, back in June, a queen who at sometimes was able to attend the various ceremonies, such as being on the balcony there with her family, but then she had to cancel some events. But then there was a moment that really showed the fact that the Queen, for all of her perception as a very, very serious person, had an irreverent side as well. Let me just play this piece of video when the Queen suddenly showed up on television with Paddington Bear.
Thank you for having me. I do hope you're having a lovely Jubilee. Tea? Oh, yes, please. Oh, terribly sorry.
Never mind.
Oh dear. Perhaps you would like a marmalade sandwich. I always keep one for emergencies.
So do I. I keep mine in here. For later.
The party is about to start, Your Majesty.
Happy Jubilee, ma'am. And thank you for everything.
That was such an endearing moment, Shannon, and such a surprise as well, you know, when that hit the airwaves. So many people thought that the Queen would never do anything like that. It was just such a wonderful moment as she celebrated her Jubilee.
It's bringing a tear to my eye to watch it. It was sweet at the time, and now just is so heartwarming. You know, she had a silly side. Steve was talking about when she jumped out of the helicopter for the London 2012 Olympics with 007, which was so exciting. And then you might remember a funny social media video that Prince Harry and the Queen did with the Obamas when they were promoting the Invictus Games. So she had a sense of humor about herself. She knew how people saw her, and every once in a while she would sort of break and give us a sense to her true personality. And of course, you know, she loved her family, she loved her country, and as Paddington says, the country loves her back.
And she loved marmalade sandwiches as well. Shannon, thank you so much.
It was always such a joke about what she kept in her purse, so now we know.
You know. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Finally, Sandra, we're getting a statement from President Biden and the First Lady. It's a long statement, so I'll just read a short part of it here. In a world of constant change, she, the Queen, was a steadying presence and a source of comfort and pride for generations of Britons, including many who have never known their country without her. An enduring admiration for Queen Elizabeth II united people across the Commonwealth. The 7 decades of her history-making reign bore witness to an age of unprecedented human advancement and the forward march of human dignity. Again, it's a much longer statement, which we'll get to in the moments ahead.
And obviously, a lot is already underway in just the hours after her death. This is a live look outside of Balmoral Castle there in Scotland. Ashley Webster is joining us now from Fox Business. Ashley, so many stories will be told of the Queen. And
Yes.
she was known for her caution. Okay, as one recent biographer, Sally Bedell Smith, notes in a recent biography, Elizabeth the Queen, although she refused to wear a hard hat when riding on horseback, which she did really up until the final years of her life, but it turns out for a practical reason, prompting the staff at Windsor Castle to joke that, quote, the only thing that comes between the Queen and her heir is an Hermes scarf. Nor does she use a seatbelt in her cars, and she drives on the private roads of her estates like a bat out of hell, said Margaret Rhodes. Ashley?
You know, let us not forget also, towards the end of the Second World War, she was trained as a mechanic on trucks, and she always took a lot of pride in being able to try and fix anything that was wrong on her, you know, her Land Rovers on her royal estate. She was always first to say, let me get under the hood and see if I can fix it, which always made me laugh. By the way, I just wanted to bring up to speed, there has been confirmation, according to the BBC, that Charles will be known as King Charles III. There was a lot of speculation. He could have used Charles, he could have used his other Christian names, Philip, Arthur, or George. He could have been King Arthur, which would have been interesting, but apparently he has settled on King Charles III. So that's some interesting news there. But for now, the focus, of course, is on the Queen and her remarkable life. And when you look at all these statements that are coming in from heads of state, she really was admired. There's no doubt about it. But I think the UK is going to be overwhelmed a little bit with national sadness. There's no doubt about it. She's been there. She's always been there. It's hard to think of her not being there, and I think that will come home. The reality will set in, and a whole brand new era will begin. She was 96. We knew this day was going to come at some point, but even so, it is still a shock.
You know, it's a long time since we've had a King Charles. King Charles I, 1625 yes. until his execution in 1649, and then yes. Charles II, 1630 to 1685 he lived. So this is a name that is being resurrected from the annals of history, which I think for people in the UK has some measure of significance. Am I right in that?
You are, yeah. I mean, look, you know, when you grow up in the UK, you don't really think of the centuries and centuries of history until you go somewhere else. You go, you know what, there is a very long history. It is remarkable. And when you trace it through the monarchy like that, it is, you know, King Charles I was beheaded not far from where Buckingham Palace is. You just go up Whitehall, an area on the right. So, yes, there is a lot of history, some of it a bit bloody, but the name Charles itself holds a lot of sway and is certainly one for the ages when it comes to the monarchy and the different rulers over time. But just to sing the national anthem as God Save the King is going to take some getting used to. It's been God Save the Queen for 70 years, so yeah. It's an interesting time.
To that note, the words of the national anthem will be changed. The new postage stamps, the currency created to reflect Prince Charles' ascension to the throne, as we learn that he will go by and has chosen to go by King Charles III. That's a live look at London right now, outside of Buckingham Palace, where the crowds have been gathering there for hours, I would say even days, as they started to learn of the possible passing of the Queen, which we obviously broke the news just a short time ago, about an hour and a half ago, that the Queen has passed, age 96. And John, we have the photo now outside Buckingham Palace as they were awaiting word on her health. There was a downpour, and the crowd turned after the rain passed and a double rainbow formed. The New York Times first reported this with the picture. Here's the picture. And the crowd broke out in song as those mourners continue to gather there outside of the palace. Yeah,
it's a very rare occurrence, and, you know, is there spiritual significance to it? There well could be. Fox News contributor, National Review Institute fellow Douglas Murray is back with us now. Douglas, we didn't know of the Queen's passing the last time we spoke with you. Your thoughts now that we have learned?
Yes, I mean, it's an incredibly sad day for the people of Great Britain, for the Commonwealth, and I think for the world. The Queen has been such a mainstay of all of our lives, really, and connects the people of the United Kingdom and her allies and friends back to that greatest generation of the Second World War. There's enormous significance in her passing. It is the end, as Prime Minister Liz Truss just said earlier, It's the passing of a second Elizabethan age and the dawn of a new era, the era of King Charles III. As you were mentioning just there, that does have great significance. Of course, the history of the Charleses is a complicated one. You mentioned the end of Charles I, but Charles II, of course, represented the restoration of the monarchy in the 17th century. So there's great significance. King Charles III will reign over a nation that is certainly in great mourning at the moment, but I think will also be a nation which feels deep gratitude for the many, many decades of service that Queen Elizabeth gave. It is the signal thing of her reign, is that clip which you played earlier in the hour of her statement as Princess Elizabeth at the age of 21, when she promised that her life, whether it was long or short, would be dedicated to the service of her country. And I think that sense of service, the sense of dignity, of stoicism, you might even say, in the face of all manner of challenges and changes, is something that Elizabeth II will always be remembered for.
That exact statement when she was speaking to her future subjects, her 21st birthday, April 26, 1947, when she said, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." What also strikes me, Douglas, is looking back at her first televised Christmas address in 1957, in which she said, "I cannot lead you into battle. I do not give you laws or administer justice, but I can do something else. I can give you my heart and my devotion to these old islands and to all the peoples of our brotherhood of nations." Just an incredible way with words throughout her reign.
She did have. It's a very moving statement and something she absolutely held to. The Queen didn't say very much publicly, but when she did, it was always of great significance. You might remember that after September the 11th, there was the service of national mourning in, I think, St. Thomas on Fifth Avenue in New York, and the Queen sent a statement through one of her representatives, where she said to the American people, she said, "Grief is the price we pay for love." It was an extraordinarily poignant and a deep insight. And that is something that I think people admired her for. Statesmen admired her. People around the world recognized that she was a store not just of historical significance, but also of historic wisdom. That's why so many American presidents and others so enjoyed the time they spent in her company. I've heard this from several people in the administrations, Democrat and Republican, in America. They talk about the way in which the hours they spent with the Queen were among the happiest and most meaningful of their times as president. And that is largely perhaps to do with the fact that she was a person of great wisdom, who also, of course, embodied a type of quiet courage that so many people admire and perhaps so few people show. You mentioned the war. Of course, she did serve in a capacity then as a young woman, and it's also important to remember that her first prime minister was Winston Churchill. Her first prime minister was Queen. On the day that World War II came to an end, she was standing on the balcony of Buckingham Palace with her father, the late King, her mother, the late Queen Mother, and also Winston Churchill. And there's enormous significance to that. During the Second World War, there was talk that the royal family, particularly the princesses, the now late Queen and her late sister, the Princess Margaret, there was talk that they should perhaps be taken away from Britain to a safer place, perhaps to Canada, because of the proximity of the Nazi invasion. The late Queen Mother said, very importantly, when this was put to her, she said, "The girls will not leave without me. I will not leave without the king. The king will not leave." And that sense of standing firm at the worst times was something that I think everyone will recognize and honor the Queen for, recognize that lifetime of service, that extraordinary lifetime of putting others before herself, as she promised to do as a young woman. She's going to be very, very deeply missed. And this really is a very unusually meaningful time.
Yeah, a moment of courage there that we saw reflected recently with Vladimir Zelensky refusing entreaties to leave Ukraine, saying that he is going to stand tough. We had that tender moment a moment ago, Douglas, the Queen with Paddington Bear. We've got an old movie tone reel here from 1957 that I want to put up. This is Charles, who was a young boy at the time, greeting his mother as she returned from her first visit to the United States back in 1957. Do we have that video that we can put up? And let me just read the statement from. Let's see the video. There's the Queen coming back with Charles at her side.
Making her debut as a toddler will have nay to do with the kilted greeter. A generously proffered hand by Prince Charles, however, shows the lad who will one day be king has a proper respect for the responsibilities of royalty.
One day be king. That was 1957. It's now 2022. Yeah. But here's the statement from Charles that was released a short time ago. The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms, and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. I mean, that is a fitting and beautiful tribute to his mother.
Yes, it is, and it also reflects, I think, something that is worth commenting on, which is the significance to the now late Queen of her faith. She was a woman of very deep faith. She was, of course, one of her titles was Defender of the Faith. She was the head of the Anglican Church, of the Church of England. And that wasn't for her just some kind of honorary title. It was something she took as being a deeply meaningful role. She was herself a person of very deep Christian belief and courage, and she very often would reflect on that in her messages to the nation and the significance in her life of her faith in God. And her son will now also take over that role. Mm-hmm. As he said, I'm sure that the family will be comforted, not just by the huge outpouring of feelings around the world, but also be comforted by their own faith. It's an extraordinarily important aspect of the monarchy in the UK.
Douglas, good to have you with us to share your thoughts. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
All right, thank you, Douglas. Let's bring in Darren McGrady now, former chef to Queen Elizabeth II. Darren, thank you so much for joining us. Please do share your memories of the Queen.
I spent 11 years traveling around the world and every day cooking breakfast, lunch, afternoon tea and dinner for Her Majesty. And the nation's lost a grandmother. In fact, I think the world's lost a grandmother. And just seeing, a beaming smile as she came into the kitchen, with or without those corgis, it's just such a sad day right now.
We saw her fondness for marmalade sandwiches in that little clip that we played earlier this hour with Paddington Bear. But, tell us about the Queen, because so many of us only saw the public persona. Again, in that clip with Paddington Bear, she showed her irreverence. But for the most time, the Queen that we saw was stiff upper lip, very stoic. What was she like in person?
Yeah, that's true. Most people only saw the Queen on duty, and to be at Balmoral with the Queen and see a sense of humour. And I remember the first day I met her, I was walking along the path at Balmoral by the river, and she was coming the other way with the corgis, and the corgis saw me, started barking, all ran towards me, barking like crazy. Laughing. She didn't call them off or anything. Bless her. I mean, she's just so funny. And another time I was in the kitchen at Sandringham and she came in and I was making crepes. I had 6 pans on the stove at once and I thought, this is a royal command performance. She's going to be really impressed. She looked at me and said, isn't that cheating? Shouldn't you be flipping them? And I thought, oh my goodness, I've got to do 6 pans now in front of the Queen. I did, one after the other, and she just looked at me, laughed, big beaming smile, and said, bravo, and walked off.
You know, it's interesting you say that because Howard Morgan, an artist who painted the Queen's portrait in the 1980s, was quoted saying, "Her private side took me totally by surprise. She talks like an Italian. She waves her hands about. She's enormously expressive." To your point, Chef, you know, most of us only saw her in her formal duties. I've also read that she was very particular about what she ate and when she ate it, and that oftentimes it was the exact same thing every single day. Was that your experience with her?
Yeah, the Queen, you know, the Queen ate to live rather than live to eat. And so it was always difficult trying to put a new recipe on the menu for her. But when you did, you were supposed to send the recipe up to the Queen so that she could read it and take a look at it first and say, yes, I'll take that, or no, thank you. I did that once, sent up a dish called Veiled Farmer's Daughters, a strawberry dish, and forgot to send the recipe. I got a note back. Who or what are the Veiled Farmer's Daughters, with a smile?
The Veiled Farmer's Daughter, that's a terrific name. As we see, Chef, all of the people, and there were hundreds, now it looks like there could be thousands gathering outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. What's the mood of the country right now? I mean, it's never easy to lose a monarch, even at the age of 96, but hers is the very definition of a life well lived and a life to be celebrated.
Yes, I mean, you think that, you know, most of the country have grown up only ever knowing this one queen and this one monarch ruling and giving stability to the nation. And she really was the nation's grandmother. That when we saw her, I mean, the Paddington sketch was just the epitome of the Queen. Her happiness, her sense of humor, her smiles. And I'm just thrilled she got the Platinum Jubilee in. And it's just a sad, sad day today. And I think that right now she's on her way upstairs. And I think she's having dinner, probably a barbecue at Balmoral with Prince Philip.
And as we get these beautiful images coming in, as people all around the globe are laying flowers and remembering her, and we're also getting word from the Paris mayor that the Eiffel Tower will go dark as night falls in Europe. The French mayor, the Paris mayor, saying the Eiffel Tower will be extinguished in homage to Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. Chef, you know, it's so important for all of us to remember these stories. You have such personal ones, and you see this crowd gathering outside Buckingham Palace, for the most part people who never got to know her personally, but they loved and adored this queen.
I think that, you know, over the years, she just touched everyone's heart, you know, going back to the war and how as a young girl, as someone said earlier, you know, she wouldn't move away to Canada or anywhere. None of the royal family would. Just going through everything that they've been through, you know, over these 70 years, and to be thrust into this at 25 years young and told you're going to be queen. She's just done an incredible job. And I think, you know, the nation's lost a grandmother.
You know, Chef, you mentioned what she has been through, and she has been through so much, but who wouldn't? I mean, when you're on the throne for 70 years, you tend to go through a lot. But she lost the love of her life, Philip, in April of last year. And could it be said, and was it your perception, that to some degree she lived the last 16 months of her life with a broken heart?
I think that, you know, the loss of Prince Philip, who'd been by her side for so long, was a major loss to the Queen, and absolutely. And I think that, you know, she had her royal corgis. She loved those corgis, and to have the corgis by her side, but it was never Prince Philip. And, you know, just thinking back now to the days when she was dancing with Prince Philip at Balmoral Castle, the big smiles and beams on both their faces, I think that, you know, she started deteriorating after Prince Philip died.
An incredible love story, those two, and it started so young. And she has gone on the record over the years saying when their eyes first met, she just knew. She knew that Philip was the one for her, and she settled on him, and they lived a very long, beautiful love story and life together. Chef, we really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing your memories.
You know, also interesting to note, for so many of us that know and have grown up with some of the newer generation of royals, including Kate Middleton, she is so loved by that country, John. And the Queen's biographer, Sally Bedell Smith, speaking today, telling People magazine that Kate Middleton has modeled herself after the Queen. The Duchess is 40 years old. She says she's observed the monarch as she prepares to take on her future role of Queen Consort. The biographer saying Catherine has learned by observing. She knows what resonates. She will have absorbed a lot from this Queen. And I think we've all witnessed a very special relationship between those two as well.
There's no question. You know, the chef, Darren McGrady, kept mentioning her corgis. She, over the course of her monarchy, owned more than 30 corgis and dorgies as well, which is a variation of the corgi, all going back to the lineage of her first corgi, Susan, who was given to her on her 18th birthday in 1944. Let's rewind the clock for a second here. Let's go back to June 3rd, 1953, in Movie Tone News. Watch here.
Queen Elizabeth, accompanied by the Duke of Edinburgh, left Buckingham Palace to be crowned sovereign of Great Britain and its far-spread Commonwealth and Empire. A gilded coach escorted by Her Majesty's household guards transported the royal pair to Westminster Abbey. And as the procession made its way through the history-hallowed streets of London, a loyal people roared out their acclaim.
All right, some memories from 70 years ago now. It's amazing that time has gone by so quickly for all of us. I remember as a boy singing God Save the Queen, and now bidding farewell to Queen Elizabeth.
A queen, a grandmother, a mother, a leader to many. She will be missed, John, and our prayers, our thoughts with her family as they grieve the loss of Queen Elizabeth II.
And a lot more to come over the course of the next 12 days.
Indeed. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sandra Smith.
And I'm John Roberts. We'll see you again tomorrow. The Story with Martha starts right now.
Thank you very much, John and Sandra. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Martha McCallum at Fox News headquarters in New York. The breaking news today, the enormously large news coming from London and from Scotland today, and you see the crowds responding to it, pouring in by the hour. It is now 8 p.m. at Buckingham Palace. The reaction coming in from all over the world after the passing of Queen Elizabeth II earlier today. So the palace announced the news this way, quote, "The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow." So that is the new reality in the United Kingdom. The King and the Queen Consort, that is Charles and Camilla, the royal family rushed to Balmoral earlier today after the palace announced that the Queen was under, quote, medical supervision. Doctors were very concerned about her health. We got a glimpse of Prince William, Prince Edward, and Prince Andrew. There's William descending the steps in Aberdeen, Scotland, as he arrived coming up from his home at Windsor now earlier today. William, of course, the next in line, driving some of the family members to Balmoral earlier today. We just saw the Queen on Tuesday. She looked well when she met with the new British Prime Minister, Liz Truss. But yesterday came the report that she was canceling a virtual meeting, and the doctors had told her to rest. There's an image of Liz Truss, and this is now a real moment in history as her last official meeting, as she gave the ability to form a government to Prime Minister Liz Truss, something that she clearly wanted to do because it was a very important piece of business, and that is the 14th Prime Minister that she has done that for, that given them the ability, the invitation to form a government. She celebrated the Platinum Jubilee in June, marking 70 years on the throne. It was an absolutely jubilant ceremony, several days of events. Some of them she skipped due to discomfort. She's 96 years old at the time, but she made two really triumphant balcony appearances, I should say, one at the beginning and one at the end of these celebrations. Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history, was 96 years old. UK royal reporter Neil Shawn is standing by with us this afternoon. He has covered the royal family for more than 20 years, has met the Queen. But first, we go to our senior foreign affairs correspondent, Greg Palcott, who is covering this story live from London. Hi, Greg.
Hey, Martha, that's right. Fast-moving events in the last couple of hours after the sad, tragic news of the loss of Queen Elizabeth II, the beloved sovereign of this nation. The crowds quickly gathered outside of Buckingham Palace when news of her passing came. That news officially posted on an official royal notice, flags lowered to half-mast, even a rainbow appearing over the official residence. The family had gathered, as you noted, Martha, at her Balmoral Scottish estate. 4 children, as well as grandchildren, rushed up there, as it now turns out, to pay their respects, including King Charles III, who said, in part, in a statement, "We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms, and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world." Yes, the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, was one of the last people outside of the immediate royal family to see the Queen on Tuesday at Balmoral. Here is a bit of what she had to say late today.
Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her.
The Queen, yes, has served 70-plus years. She has seen 15 prime ministers. She has lived through 15 U.S. presidents, seen 14 of them. Here is what President Biden said in a statement in part today as well. Queen Elizabeth II was a statesman on unmatched dignity and constancy who deepened the bedrock alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States. She helped make our relationship special. So what we have now, Martha, is King Charles III. Again, that is his official name. We have that confirmed from Clarence House. We'll come back to London tomorrow with Camilla, the Queen consort. And now the long process begins. His accession, visiting the various parts of the United Kingdom, and, of course, the run-up to what should be an incredibly moving, massive, huge global event, that is the funeral for Queen Elizabeth II. And that should happen about 10 days from now. Yeah. Back to you.
No doubt it will be as extraordinary as she was. Greg, thank you very much. With that, we bring in our friend Neil Shawn, UK royal reporter and media correspondent, has covered the royal family and the Queen for more than 20 years and met her on several occasions. Neil, it's good to have you with us. We knew this day would come eventually. What is your reaction? What are you feeling today as you take in this news?
Well, you know, it's terribly sad, isn't it, Martha? Because we were together, weren't we, at the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. A wonderful time. And, you know, it was nice to see Her Majesty on the balcony. We knew that she was suffering from a lot of discomfort. However, you know, for people in the media, let me explain, a lot of people did wonder whether Her Majesty would ever actually return back from Balmoral. You know, it was always her dear wish to, shall we say, leave this earth there. That's what we were told. And when we saw her with Liz Truss the other day, our brand new British Prime Minister, you know, there were grave concerns then because she'd lost even more weight from what we'd previously seen a couple of months ago. And of course, let's not forget, you know, on a more serious note, Her Majesty the Queen had been put through some incredible strain by, you know, senior members of her family. We don't need to go into that detail too much, but, you know, she did take it all on board. And what I thought was amazing, you know, Martha, was when they were looking around the Balmoral room the other day, there were all the newspapers laid out on the table for her. So there is no escape from this bad press that, you know, she would have seen. And whichever way you look at it, you know, although the lady was obviously suffering the great loss of her rock, His Royal Highness Prince Philip, you know, these last couple of years cannot have been easy. It was one battle after another. And I thought she rode it with great aplomb. I thought she battled on incredibly well. And when we last saw her down here in London at Windsor, you know, it was very sad. And let's not forget, she also battled COVID. And I love the way that she shared, I'm sure you did, Martha, that, you know, it left one terribly tired. You know, it resonated with everybody because everybody who's had it would obviously know, you know, she was speaking from the heart. For me, from a personal point of view, the picture sat of her alone at the funeral in St. George's Chapel really was the one most haunting picture. And I think for my generation, who saw her in the, you know, the usual smiling Queen mode, that really will stay with me for the rest of my life. I absolutely adored her. I thought she was wonderful, and it's such a sad loss. But as she said, in the fullness of time, everything changes.
It's so true. And she has watched the passing of Philip, of her mother and Margaret, both in the same year, back in 2002. And these were the people that were the core of her life. Growing up as a young girl with Margaret, with her mother, the Queen Mom, and her father, King George VI. And as a child, never expected that she would become queen at all until the abdication of Edward
Yes.
and his marriage to Wallis Simpson. You know, I was struck by Liz Truss's words, Neil. I thought they were very beautiful. And I thought, she said that Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. And when you think about those years, back to 1952 and now to 2022, you know, the modern history that spans most of our lives, I think that's a very good way of putting it.
You know, it was very eloquently put. You're right. I mean, I just felt that, you know, for anybody's generation, for anybody, you know, who's under 70, we don't know anything else. And it was always so reassuring when you saw her. And I know this may sound to some people sycophantic, but I have to tell you, when Queen Elizabeth came on television to talk to us about the pandemic in that famous green dress now, honestly, I was so incredibly moved. And it was just so nice that she was speaking out. It was very reassuring, because in those terrible times that we had with the pandemic, to see someone speaking who'd lived through so many other things gave many people hope. You know, she'd been through the World War, you know, she'd gone through so many other crises, and seemingly seamlessly as well had survived. And the line that she said, "We'll meet again," very moving.
Very moving indeed. And it's a great point, because she did have she wasn't, you know, she didn't speak out very often, never did a single interview in her entire reign. And yet when she did choose her moments to speak to the public, and she did it every Christmas with a message, she did it after Diana was killed in the car crash in Paris, and she did it during COVID. And in those moments, she really did, I think, Neil, resonate. And you tell me, you know, as a Brit, you know, what that meant to sort of have that grandmotherly presence come through by her in those really pivotal moments.
I mean, you're spot on, Martha. It was those things. I remember being at school, and she came, you know, to our local town, and you know, to see this is pre-social media, you know, to see this lady up close in a car was incredible, you know. And as she rightly said, you know, she was the sort of person that everybody looked to, and she had to be seen, as she openly said, to be believed. And it was so true, because when you think about it, she was everywhere, you know, on post boxes, stamps. We saw the image was indelible. It was every place you could look. So when people did meet Her Majesty the Queen, like, of course, President Trump, who I know she had a soft spot for, let me tell you, even though he sort of tripped up on the inspecting the troops and all that sort of stuff, people who made her laugh, she did really like. She had a soft spot for Boris, and we know that she really, really got on incredibly well with Winston Churchill, her very first Prime Minister, because he was the one that actually guided her. You know, I mean, a young girl, brand new in this job, who could she turn to? And there he was. So I think she was very loyal to people that were good to her. But more importantly, she was an incredible mimic, by the way. So she did a very good impression of President Trump, let me tell you.
That's funny. Yeah, I think that I was covering that day when President Trump went to Windsor, and you could see that there was just sort of a fun rapport between them. I think she always appeared to try to find something that was common ground with all of the people that she met, so she'd have something to talk about with them and kind of find a way in to make it a personal, easy moment for that person who is in the position of meeting the Queen. Let's shift gears, if I may, Neil, and talk talk a little bit about what's going to happen now? This Operation London Bridge has been in effect and been worked on since the 1960s. There's a ton of work going on behind the scenes right now. Give us a little bit of insight into what we can expect. And will the funeral be 10 days from today?
Well, that's normally the protocol. I mean, you know, when you think about it, Martha, this is brand new because, you know, we haven't had this for 70 years. So, you know, what was then in the 1950s is possibly going to be updated. The idea that His Royal Highness Prince Charles returns back to London tomorrow, I think there will be some kind of address, maybe, you know, televised address, maybe it's pre-recorded, something like that. I would expect something like that because he would want to speak to the public, the subjects, and then from there, really, you know, it's all really in the early stages of how they're going to map it out. I mean, obviously this is a global event, you know, and it will be covered worldwide. She reached every corner of the world, and whatever you may think of what's coming up, you are now truly living through history. You know, people will look at this moment and, you know, the next 10 days or 12 days or so, and they will look back on it, you know. So we are lucky to be living in this moment. Very sad that we've lost her, but truly that's going to be the next phase. You know, it's going to be, you know, what happens next. You know, I'm not sure. There was a report earlier on that there would be a line in state. I'm not so sure about that, but again, you know, things are moving. It's a fast-moving story.
I think lie in state in Westminster for 3 days was in the original protocol plan, but as you point out, there's no doubt that Queen Elizabeth has been discussing this with her private secretary and her family in recent weeks because she's clearly a person who went through the red boxes with care, wants to dot every I and cross every T and have everything well placed. Not so much, I would imagine, Neil, as you know, as it reflects on her, but as it reflects on the crown and the continuity and wanting to make sure that this event, which, as you say, will be watched by the globe. I can't think of another individual in the world, really, that will have more attention at their funeral than this funeral.
Exactly.
But that's really what it's about, right? This is a moment to present them in the best possible light and show that now the torch, the crown, is being passed.
Well, it's going to be very difficult, to be honest, Martha, for King Charles, you know, Prince Charles, because, you know, the Queen was so universally loved and never really put a foot wrong, you know. I mean, I can't really think of anything that she got wrong. You know, people might claim she did, but as you rightly said earlier on, because there's no documentation of interviews to go back on or anything like that, we don't really know her private thoughts. We've never known that. So that's really been a blank canvas for her to, you know, push forward and reign. Prince Charles has been a little bit more vocal and obviously has his, you know, certain quirks and things like that, although well loved over here, I might point out. But, you know, for him, it's very similar, I believe, to Queen Victoria and King Edward. You know, he, of course, had to pick up from Queen Victoria, who was also very well loved. We read the alternative stories now, but, you know, if you look deeper, she was a monarch very much like Queen Elizabeth, who reigned for so long, people didn't know anything else. So it was very hard for King Edward to take that mantle. And I do see King Charles is going to have a little bit of a bumpy ride, but I hope and pray that things work out for him and, of course, the continuation of our wonderful British monarchy.
Yeah, and of course, people will look not only to Charles, but to the next generation, to William and Catherine, who will no doubt have already been stepping into more prominent roles, and no doubt that will continue, and we'll see a lot of that. I just want to read what Liz Truss said about now King Charles. She said, His Majesty King Charles III, with the King's family, we mourn the loss of his mother, and as we mourn, we must come together as a people to support him, to help him bear the awesome responsibility that he now carries for us all. We offer him our loyalty and devotion, just as his mother devoted so much to so many for so long. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished it. So Liz Truss's words, very effective and I would say very hopeful. I mean, it's a difficult time in the United Kingdom. There's a lot going on, and these will be difficult ruptures to get across.
Very difficult, Martha, and so, as you rightly said, so well put. I mean, I think Miss Truss has done an incredible job. You know, when you think of it, she's new to the job too. And as you rightly said earlier on, that moment of her meeting the Queen is now a major moment in history. I think one moment that maybe will cheer your viewers up, though, and it's one that certainly does for me. When you look back at the Platinum Jubilee and you look at that beautiful picture of Prince George looking up to his grandmother on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, it really is a moment in history, because there is this young boy not knowing that, you know, she's not going to be with us much longer, but there he saw exactly how much she was loved, and this is going to be his destiny too one day. Big shoes to fill.
Big shoes to fill, indeed. We're looking at just these wonderful videos while we're talking here. I think this is the Queen several years back that was outside of the church up at Sandringham, I believe. And there's a young Prince William and his father walking behind the Queen, kind of smirking and having some fun, William. And now he's very serious as he's a father and a husband and moving into a new role. Harry on the screen now. A lot of questions about that. They were not expected to see each other while they were all sort of a third of a mile apart at Windsor. But now today, Neil, no doubt they were in the same room, William and Harry.
Well, of course, yes, they would have been. I mean, I think it's very difficult, isn't it? Because the sad thing is it possibly takes a family tragedy to make people think, you know, where they are and look at their own lives. I think it's very wise, if the report is true, that the Duchess of Sussex very, you know, kindly kept away. And if that is true, it does say a lot, doesn't it, about where the family is, you know? But I think for Harry and William, I hope that this is a moment where they get some sense together, because really the unitedness of the family moving forward is pivotal. And I would suggest that Prince Charles is going to need both their support. Some people might say that this could even herald a return back within the fold for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. I know Harry would very much like to return. I'm not so sure about the Duchess.
Well, one of the problems is the book. Harry has a book coming out, supposed to come out this fall or maybe in the early part of the winter. But there was even a suggestion that William did not feel, you know, that he wanted to speak freely in front of his brother until that book came out. I don't know if that's true, but you've definitely seen some hesitation in interaction between them in recent months. Yeah. Clearly, since the Oprah interview.
It's true, Martha. No, that is true. I mean, you know, what you have to think about is, you know, if you have those private conversations, even Prince Charles, you know, Camilla, whatever, anything can be repeated back. And unfortunately, what I would say, you know, it's very sad in a sense that, as we've seen, there are so many mistruths that have been put out there that really, you know, if you're in William's shoes and one day in the fullness of time will become king, he can't risk any of that, you know. Here is a man with a destiny that he knows. And sadly for his younger brother, who seems to have got engulfed in a soap opera, sadly for him, it seems that he can't trust him right now. Let's hope, as I say, this terrible tragedy, well, we you know, think about the Queen with greatness, maybe this could be something that could rebond the family, the whole of the family.
Yep. Neil, I'm going to leave it there. I know we're going to be talking a lot in the coming days, and we'll get some more details about when exactly. The funeral is expected to be about 10 days out, which would put us around September 17th. But I will be over there with you shortly, and I thank you very much for being here today. Thank you, Neil.
A pleasure, Martha. Thank you.
Joining me now is Dominic Green, contributor for the Wall Street Journal and fellow of the Royal Historical Society. He's covered the royal family since 2015, and he writes today, the second Elizabethan age is over. Two great women who left an enormous mark on the United Kingdom, and now the second Queen Elizabeth has passed. Dominic, welcome. Good to have you here today. Your thoughts as we watch all of this.
Good to be here. It's quite astonishing. It is a terrible shock. It cannot be a surprise. Obviously, we had known the Queen had been ill for a while. But nevertheless, the shock is palpable, and the scenes that you're seeing in London are those spontaneous shows of grief and affection that really characterize what Winston Churchill, when the Queen was crowned, you know, 70 years ago, what Winston Churchill called a magic link between the Queen and the people. And that link has become a global one. It's quite amazing to see the reaction as a genuine global one.
You know, we've been watching these reports, and Prince Charles is going to be known as King Charles III now. The coronation will be some time off, but he becomes king instantly as soon as the Queen passed. And it is not a given that he would take his name, Charles. Queen Elizabeth, it appears, didn't hesitate to keep her own name, Elizabeth, but her father, King George VI, was actually Albert. So Charles did have an option here to choose a different name as king. Any thoughts on the announcement that he will indeed be Charles, and he'll be Charles III?
Well, welcome to the Carolingian age, the third Carolingian age, and there hasn't been one, of course, since the 17th century. Charles II was king in 1660. I think it appeals to now King Charles because it says something about a new beginning or a new start. He's always been a person of firm opinions and known what he thinks about things, and I think he wants to make his own way as a monarch. It has been said, or he has let it be known, that he would be less forthcoming in his opinions once he had become king, that he would have a more constitutional and cautious role. But certainly it does say something about him wanting to make it his own reign. And of course, when Queen Victoria died, her son Edward ruled for only 9 years. But we speak of an Edwardian age, nevertheless. And so who knows what the Carolingian age we are now entering will have in store for us.
You know, speak about the challenge that Charles will have, and it isn't dissimilar, as Neil Sean just said, and you bring up as well, after Queen Victoria's reign, and Elizabeth surpassed Queen Victoria's reign several years ago, how hard it is to step into the shoes of someone who has had such a deep relationship with a country.
Well, I mean, is it harder to step into someone's shoes at the peak of power, which is, of course, where Britain was in 1901 when Edward VII took over? Or is it harder to step in as Elizabeth II did in 1952 when Britain was really at the bottom? It was in ruins, literally, after the Second World War. Things are not going great in Britain now, but nevertheless, the relationship between the royal family and the people is extremely solid. The Queen has worked very hard and created a modern monarchy, the firm as they call it, and there is a great reservoir of goodwill and affection for the whole family, including, you know, the minor members as well. And so I think Charles III, as he now is, will catch, if he's wise, a wave of this affection, and it should carry him a long way forward. I think there are always going to be difficulties, but the difficulties in Britain today are not really constitutional or to do with the monarch's standing. They're economic. They're to do with the cost of living and the cost of energy. And I'm sure that Prince Charles, who's long been an advocate of green energy and so on, will quietly be saying, "I told you so," but I very much doubt he will say it aloud. I think he will be looking to build a strong relationship with his people.
He's had a long time to think about this moment. Give us a sense of what you expect from him. He's expected to leave Balmoral tomorrow and come to London, come down to Buckingham Palace. What do you expect from him? And give us any sense that you have so far of how this is all going to lay out. The Queen died at Balmoral in Scotland, and that brings with it some issues of its own in terms of what happens in the coming days.
That's right. They will have to bring the body down to the south of England, probably by plane or train. King Charles, as he now is, if he is well advised, will meet the people who have gathered outside the palace and speak to them as one human being to another. It's a very strange business to be a monarch. You are a human being, but you're also a living symbol. And the sooner the new king shows that he has that ability, which he has shown before, to bridge that gap, the easier the transition will be in the affections of the public. Meanwhile, this enormously complicated machinery, which has been very carefully planned, Operation London Bridge, will move forward. There may or may not be a lying in state. Again, I feel that would be a very positive and sensible thing to do, to allow people to pay their respects. There is still a great amount of grief in Britain after COVID-19, and this sort of thing will give people a chance to express their loss, personal and national. And then there will be the state funeral, which, you know, is one of those things that the British do still excel at. They are very good at the ceremonials, whether it's births, marriages, or deaths. And that will be one of the great events of our time, really, one of the great things to remember. And then further down the line from that, there will, of course, be the coronation of Charles III. And that is a way off, but that, too, will be quite a spectacular event in its own way. And each of these things will bring people together on new terms. So it's going to be an enormously complicated transitional period.
My instinct from watching this family, and you've watched all of it extremely closely, is that it might be likely that it's a train, that train going from the Highlands to London would be reminiscent of what Americans think of as the train that brought Abraham Lincoln's body back. It's a very significant form of travel that would give the Queen sort of that opportunity, having passed, to go through that route. Do you expect that that's likely what will happen?
I would hope that it is, because you're quite right. It is the method that would give the most people the chance to show their respects along the way. This was a person who was so popular, actually more popular than the very idea of monarchy. She had higher ratings than the institution itself. There are 65 million people in Britain, and almost all of them will want to show in some way what it meant to them to have known her, and they did feel that they knew her. We all did. You know, we knew nobody else, and this was a constant presence in our lives, even when everything else changes. So I think the chance to say goodbye will mean an enormous amount to an enormous number of people.
Well, we expect we'll start to get some of these details in the coming hours, perhaps. Now it's evening, it's 8:28, huge outpouring of people gathering in front of Buckingham Palace, and it's going to be an extraordinary number of people who are flooding into that area and into London over the coming days. And Dominic, we look forward to talking with you more about this as this period of mourning and the funeral move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martha.
So we have some new video to show you just in from Buckingham Palace. Listen to the crowd outside singing "God Save the Queen."
We long to reign over us, God save the Queen.
So that's just a spontaneous outpouring and the beginning of many of them. Night has fallen now at Buckingham Palace as we mark the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, and it comes as her kingdom is dealing with what the Wall Street Journal calls a, quote, economic and energy mess, which you just heard referred to. Piers Morgan used some more colorful language to describe the state of his homeland just a couple of days ago, and we spoke with him about that. He talked about what Liz
to their internal thinking or how things actually happened. So in some ways, we've become familiar with the monarchy through a fictional work that approximates a certain amount of what they did and imagines what they might have felt. But we don't really know if that gives us more insight into the Queen. But it makes the public feel closer to her because we feel like we've been the fly on the wall watching that. So in some ways, perhaps the fictionalized monarchy that came out of the crown is in some ways more important to our feeling of knowledge about the crown than the inscrutable Queen herself.
You know, I was looking at Twitter as well. This tweet, it just really struck out to me. So King Charles will become King Charles III. Charles I was beheaded. Charles II restored the monarchy back in 1660 as Oliver Cromwell got in the way. So the last time a Charles was on the throne was 1685.
Yeah, and I think Charles has generally been an inauspicious name ever since the first one got his head chopped off. The Restoration monarchy was also not particularly beloved. So this is bold of Charles to go with his own name. As a monarch, he would have been allowed to choose another name if he wanted to. He could have been king somebody else, but he chose to go along with his own name, and hopefully he can turn things around for King Charles's.
You know, Nicoletta, Camilla now becomes Queen Consort, and the Queen had kind of designated and demarcated that title on her. What does that mean for viewers who are not familiar with this royal terminology, with this royal lingo? Is she queen or is she not?
Well, Queen Consort, oh, that's a really good question. The royal protocol on titles is extremely detailed, and I actually think you would need some British titles expert to be able to tell you. But what it means is that Camilla gets to be referred to as the Queen, and it was always considered to be an insult when they said she was not going to be allowed to be the Queen. So the important thing is she is recognized as the Queen Consort. That means that she's not a queen of the blood. She isn't able to rule. Prince Philip was Prince Consort. So it's a very important title. But it's not quite as good as being the Queen itself. There is a qualification in it, I think, that people recognize, but it's better than what anybody thought she'd get after she and Charles married on at the time of after Diana's death and at the time of the horrible divorce and all the rest of it. So it's a step up from where she thought she'd be, but it's not quite as good as being a queen.
And you think about, too, speaking of relationships, I know that we've already been having reaction come from some of our world leaders, here in the United States, and a lot of them then will fly overseas to attend the funeral. Any insight on who may be speaking at her funeral, sharing some of those stories of just some interactions that they may have personally had with Queen Elizabeth?
That's very interesting. I think it's going to be a very scripted funeral. The Queen herself will have had a large hand in choosing who is to speak and what is going to be played in terms of music. Remember how at Prince Philip's funeral, he designed the Land Rover that carried his body to the church. So these things, these royal funerals are in planning for a long time with the actual dead person participating in the funeral. I think the Archbishop of Canterbury will definitely be there. Whether she will honor some public figures and at the risk of slighting other public figures, I'm not sure. But there may be words from the current prime minister, and there may be words from her family. But I think it will be a very heavily religious service, squarely in the tradition of the Church of England, with music and other things that she's chosen. And it'll be very interesting to see who she chooses to speak.
Yeah, Nicoletta, our viewers were just seeing some of the mourners coming out there in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. That was outside the UK ambassador's residence there in Embassy Row in Washington, D.C. And let's go into some more, Nicoletta, of these historical parallels. We're coming up on the 21st anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks this weekend. The UK was so, incredibly there for us as the special relationship endured during that very, very difficult time for our country here. And I've been seeing clips of the Royal Guards outside of Buckingham Palace playing the national anthem. They had a very, very somber and poignant ceremony at Westminster Abbey in the wake of the 9/11 terror attacks. And so Queen Elizabeth II at that time was leading the charge on that, being there for her friend, her special ally, the United States. It was very, very moving at the time, but also indicative of how much the relationship means.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right about that. And I think that the United States and Great Britain, we talked earlier about the special relationship between the two countries, something that was really pushed by Winston Churchill, who came up with the phrase, the special relationship. And the Queen has really taken that to heart. And I think one of the ironies, of course, is that America broke away from Great Britain during the American Revolution. They were enemies in the War of 1812, but that gradually, particularly during the 20th century, as two English-speaking democracies, they've become close together. And they were allies in World War I, they were allies in World War II, and now they're allies with during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that NATO alliance that was developed as a move against communism in the post-Second World War period, Britain and the United States have been incredibly important foundational members of that. The Queen's own warm regards for the United States, her generosity in hosting dinners and balls and things for presidents, and then, of course, her heartfelt compassion after 9/11 are all things that have made her close to our hearts. And I think that one of the things that was so interesting in the Jubilee when we covered that was how many Americans traveled to London at the most crowded time, the most expensive time, because they just wanted to be there to see the Queen and to celebrate her 70th year on the throne. Quite ironic, considering that America was a revolutionary breakaway and the first of Britain's colonies to really shake off the shackles of imperialism.
That's right, Nicoletta. I just want to talk about the weather. It looks like it's raining there. You can see the rain droplets on the camera, many now with umbrellas in front of Buckingham Palace. And it's been raining on and off all day like it does in London. But there was a moment outside of Buckingham Palace where the skies cleared, they became blue, and I've been seeing just this incredible photos of a rainbow forming over Buckingham Palace. You know, I don't want to look too much into that, but what a moment and what timing for something like that to happen upon the news of the Queen's death. It was almost happening concurrently. But you can see there so many of the crowd in the thousands gathering outside of Buckingham Palace. Though, Nicoletta, let's talk about the values that the Queen espoused for 70 years. Duty, honor, putting those before yourself, putting your country before yourself, not seeking fame or acknowledgement or reward, but a sense of grace and duty that some would argue is on the way out.
I think that's so true, Andrew. I mean, I think she represented all those things. And she is also emblematic of a generation. We call it the greatest generation in the United States. We think about that generation that sacrificed their lives in the Second World War dutifully and without complaint, and to basically save democracy in Europe. And she participated in the Second World War. She was a territorial a soldier, and she worked at home to participate in the war effort, as many women did at that time. And she is a connection. She is a member of the greatest generation. And so the Queen exemplified that idea of duty and country and patriotism and honor and self-sacrifice. And she was very old, 96, part of a generation that we're losing. And I think that it is very apparent to all of us, and one of the reasons it's so upsetting when someone like the Queen dies is because there's still our connection. As thin as that connection is becoming over time with so many deaths, there are connection to a time that many people look back upon and think of as a better time, when we had better values, where we were more considerate of each other, where we were more generous, where patriotism wasn't sort of a dirty word. And now what we have seems to be more factional and disagreement with one another that has become so intense that in some ways, sometimes it spills over into hatred. So I think when we lose someone of that generation, a generation able to reconcile and embrace in a very broad way, it's extremely jarring. And I think it is interesting that I think for Americans, the Queen is almost as beloved a figure as she is for many in the UK.
And speaking of that beloved figure, I know we kind of touched on what kind of reign Charles may now have in his years to come, but do you think that it's beneficial that he's filling this role after people have been in love with the Queen, or does he have a bigger challenge ahead of him because of that?
Well, I think he has a bigger challenge ahead, Christy. I think that's absolutely right. Charles and Camilla are not particularly beloved. They don't have any of the charismatic qualities that the Queen has. They aren't beautiful. And I think I mentioned this another time, which is one of the things that a female royal in particular can do. The crowns, the gowns, all of the rest of it. We follow Kate, we even follow Meghan, despite the fact that she doesn't want to be a princess anymore. Well, she sort of does, but that I guess is a different story. And it is something about that glamour that that is very attractive. And for a monarch to wear a crown and all these other things is something that seems to connect us not with just the Second World War, but it connects us with 1,000 years of history. But it translates really well in an age that is now centered around television and social media and all the rest of it. And I just don't see Charles and Camilla having that telegenic quality. Charles wants to be down to earth. He wants to be more relatable. He wants a less extravagant monarchy. But I'm not sure that he could ever be not extravagant enough for the people who want to abolish the monarchy, nor could he really be splendid enough for the people who love the Queen. So I am a little bit worried that he will be rocky, but I think he was the only choice to take over because the whole thing about the monarchy is it's magic. She dies, he becomes king. To just say, we don't really like you, so William and Kate are going to become king and queen. They are cuter and get better, Twitter feeds. That would break the magic. So I think it's very important that Charles do it first, and he will not stop doing it unless he abdicates or dies. So I think I shouldn't say we're stuck with him for a while, but I think the monarchy is now going to have to trundle along a bit with a not particularly popular or charismatic monarch.
Yeah, Nicoletta, you were mentioning the Queen as a young woman back during World War II. There's an iconic photograph of her walking with her sister, with her mother, in the ruins of London as Buckingham Palace was a target for the Germans. Almost got bombed completely. There was a fire there. So she lived through wartime. And then you talk about some who have wanted to do away with the monarchy, abolish the monarchy. One, Liz Truss, also held that view once upon a time, I think back in her college days, to which she has disavowed that. And then you see her meeting the Queen just on Monday as she became the next prime minister. So that is so interesting. But of course, we can't gloss over the fact that the line of succession is there, but they haven't done it in 70 years. They haven't had a coronation, they being whoever puts that on, the Church of England, the royal family, staffers at the palace. Are they going to have to get out the history books? Are they going to be a little rusty on this, or is the protocol already set in place?
Well, the Queen's coronation was a particularly extravagant one. And I think that she herself understood that the country, after the austerity of World War II, people were rationing clothes, rationing food, things like that. And that even lasted past the war itself. She understood that they needed a party. And so it was a coronation with all the whistles of bells, one that was just especially dramatic. And Charles has said he's going to have a much simpler one, a less expensive one, and less extravagant one. And we keep reading about Kate and Will. They're moving into a cottage near Windsor, but they're not allowed to do any remodeling at the cottage, and there isn't even room for a nanny. And I mean, to me, if you're going to have a monarchy, that's kind of, I don't want a cheap monarchy. If you're going to have a monarchy, make sure the monarchy is splendid. And I think Charles, I think wrongly, this is my opinion, I may be proven wrong, but I think Charles wrongly thinks that if the monarchy is looked upon as being ordinary and not expensive, people will be less hostile to it. But I think there may be less to hate, but there'll be nothing to love.
And speaking of love, I know that there will be tens of thousands of people who are going to be pouring out to the area to pay their respects. Of course, her coffin going to be laying there at Buckingham Palace and to then the Palace of Westminster. She'll be remaining there for a few days for the public to pay their respects. How important is that for the public to feel involved when it comes to the death of a royal family member like this?
They have been involved in every step of her life. They were involved when she became the Princess of Wales. They were involved when she was married to the incredibly handsome Prince Philip. They were involved at all her radio addresses. During the Second World War, she and her sister even gave a radio address to the children of London when they themselves were children, telling them to be brave and that it would be okay, and that they needed to show courage to give strength to the adults around them. It would be extraordinary if after all the jubilees, what were the four of them, the silver, the gold, the diamond, now the platinum, it would be extraordinary if the public weren't centrally involved in this funeral as well. And you can see that even on this dismal evening with all the rain, throngs are gathering outside Buckingham Palace. So I think there will be many, many, many people who will stand in line for hours upon hours upon hours to make sure they get to go and walk past her coffin as it lies in state. So I think that's going to be a very important piece of mourning for the British people.
Yeah, Nick led it to that point, though. We had been talking, and we were talking to some people in London earlier, that everyone there, if someone from the United States or some other country is visiting, that's really one of the first questions they ask people when they encounter them in the UK. Have you ever seen the Queen? Have you ever met the Queen? Have you ever maybe touched the Queen's hand as she has gone on some of these parades and public outings in her 70 years on the throne? And so I think it's safe to say that if they don't have a story about the Queen, they would want one. But there are so many people who have a story. They caught a glimpse, or one of their friends got to meet her at a garden party. And so she has been a ubiquitous presence in the public's consciousness, but also so present as well.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I think from ancient times, it was believed that the touch of the king could cure certain diseases, like particularly a skin disease called scrofula. When Charles I's head was chopped off, when they beheaded him, Oliver Cromwell was also trying to behead the idea of majesty. But the crowd gasped, and then people ran forward to dip their handkerchiefs in the blood from the decapitated king, because king's blood was magic and had medicinal qualities. I think a little bit of that is retained with the Queen, this idea of being in her presence, of seeing her, and certainly for the people who are invited to a garden party or one of these special events, the Queen is all about trying to show herself and to give access. The idea of royal patronages is that these charities and other good works can benefit because a member of the royal family comes along, and that brings the media, and so it brings them public attention. And the Queen has been very, very dutiful about going to the Commonwealth, that we've seen pictures of that now, to link the Commonwealth to the Crown, going to all corners of the United Kingdom to cut ribbons and to be seen. And so I think that those times when people remember, even if they didn't see her, well, she came to our town and cut the ribbon for an opening of a new orphanage or something like that, people remember that fondly. So I think she used her own mystical body, if you will, to be present in many, many places, and it helped bind people to her.
Nicoletta, I want to talk about the pop culture phenomenon that she was, because she was really plastered all over. Her image, her likeness was everywhere you look, not only in the UK, but in so many other places, especially around the Commonwealth. She was on money, she was on bills and coins and flags and memorabilia in gift stores and gift shops in London. Her image was everywhere, and I think it really is safe to say that she is the most, or was the most recognizable face, likeness, and image in the world. Would that be too hyperbolic? What do you make of that?
I think that you're probably right. I mean, she's probably as ubiquitous as the Coke can and the Big Mac, right? And I think one of the things about the monarchy that I think sometimes Charles perhaps forgets, it's $1 billion industry. And people are buying these images, they're coming over to wave flags at the Jubilee or whatever, because this queen is something special and something exciting. And I don't think people want an ordinary person, but there's something iconic about her. And even the people who look upon her as more of a meme than a source of reverence, everybody recognizes her, everyone knows who she is. And her popularity in the United Kingdom is astounding. It's very, very high. She is the highest rated member of the royal family.
And I think something I wanted to just get maybe some of your insight on is when these days are coming in after her death, and we're seeing the royal family make some appearances out in public. We know back from all of our tributes to, especially since we just had the anniversary of Prince Diana's death, they're really held to a different standard. Is that what we're going to be seeing once again from the royal family? I remember some of the rules were, you can't be crying in public. You had to still go out and greet all of the people, no matter how tragic the death may have been. But of course, in this situation, 96 years old, as we've been pointing out before, kind of expected at some point here in these next years to come.
That's a really a very good point, and that is also a very interesting point, because all those rules about behavior, about restraining emotion, about never complaining and never addressing the mean things that have been said about them, we're seeing Harry and Meghan go just full-on attack on that modus operandi. They're saying that it was cruel to not allow them to show emotion or to be unhappy or to be sad. So I think we have within the royal family itself now a bifurcation about the old stoic mode that the Queen held to very firmly, of not showing too much emotion, of just making sure that she carries herself in a self-restrained manner, to a kind of new idea of a more emotive royal family. And it's hard to tell where things will be. Will definitely seems to be on the stoic side of things. I'm not always sure it's clear with Charles. Charles, in fact, had this earth-shattering divorce with Diana because he was so madly in love with Camilla. That's not an unemotional thing to do. That's not the path of duty over the path of love. So Charles himself may be a bit of an emotional guy. And the other thing is that in recent years, since the death of Diana, we've seen the Queen smile more and try to project a warmth more than she used to sort of during her Middle Ages, when she really tried to not show emotion at all. So we've seen a little bit of a change there as well. But I think right now, it's going to be hard to imagine what the monarchy will look like without her, because she has been such an enormous presence, not just to us and the public, but to her own family. How will they govern their emotions and their self-presentation and themselves without her to rein everyone in when necessary?
It will be very interesting to see from here on, and I know all of us will be keeping our eyes glued to these next few days across the United Kingdom. Any final thoughts as we prepare to continue to honor her life and legacy from you, Nicoletta? Anything you think important to mention when it comes to the life of Queen Elizabeth II?
I think we should really look and see what is going to happen in terms of where the Labour Party stands and where the anti-monarchists stand. Are they going to take this opportunity to try and push for an abolition of the monarchy? Are they going to give the mourning some time to settle? Are they going to make their move? And I think that all of this would look a little bit different if instead of Liz Truss, who is now a hard conservative, now has in her middle age embraced the monarchy, if instead of her, we had somebody very far to the left, we would have had a much more difficult time. Perhaps they would have extolled the Queen's personal attributes, but they might not have really felt like pledging fealty to the monarchy itself. So in coming weeks, it'll be very interesting to see what turn that takes.
Yeah, and of course, we always appreciate your insight on all of these topics, too. I know Andrew Kraft and I both appreciate everything you've been contributing here as we continue to talk about the life of Queen Elizabeth II here on the day of her passing. Thank you so much, Nicoletta, for being here with us on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you very much.
And as we've mentioned before, Live Now from Fox going to continue with full coverage right here for you. And Andrew, what a day it has already been, starting early this morning when we woke up, at least on our side of the world. Still, the news was that she was being tended to at her home in Scotland before we finally learned that it was indeed true, that she came to pass here this afternoon. They'd say, though, thankfully, it was peacefully at her home. And we know that there were some immediate family members who were able to be by her side during these times, too.
Yeah, Christine, we saw them kind of race there up to Balmoral to be by her side. It was such an interesting question that you posed to Nicoletta about what grieving will look like for members of the royal family now in 2022. You know, back last year for Prince Philip's funeral, we did see the royal family, emit some emotion. We saw Prince Charles, we saw Princess Anne, Prince Philip's children, get emotional. Back then the COVID-19 restrictions were still in place. It had to be a much scaled down funeral for the Duke of Edinburgh back then, a year and a half ago. But now those COVID restrictions have been lifted and thousands are going to be coming out to pay their respects. And there's going to be quite a large funeral that's going to be taking place at St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle for the death of a monarch that has not happened in the last 70 years. Queen Elizabeth II dead today at the age of 96. We're coming up on 1 o'clock here on the West Coast, almost 9 p.m. there in London, and the Union Jack there at half-staff atop Buckingham Palace as the UK and the world mourns the passing of Queen Elizabeth.
So thank you again to everyone who has been watching here with us on Live Now from Fox. Boy, we have been bringing you the best pictures from all across the country, around the world, here again in London, but also bringing you pictures of other tributes that are being paid, like here in the United States outside of the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. You can see flowers starting to arrive and be placed around the flag. And of course, we'll continue to keep an eye on all of these live pictures coming in here, as well as playing out more of those latest condolences that are being sent out by world leaders, by also some of the very famous people who had the pleasure of meeting Queen Elizabeth II. So thank you again for being here with us on Live Now from Fox as we continue our coverage on the Queen's death. We will step away for a brief break, but don't worry, in just 2 minutes, we'll take you out to our Fox 11 team as they remember the life of Queen Elizabeth. From Fox, where we are always on top of the latest top news stories, breaking news happening all across the country. Here today, we are mourning the death of Queen Elizabeth II. The news just coming out earlier here today for many of us here in the United States. And now so many people pouring out their condolences, making statements on the life and legacy that she has left behind. This here, I just want to make note, this is a live picture out of Washington, D.C., outside of the British Embassy. We do have live pictures still coming in outside of Buckingham Palace, where flags were lowered at half-staff earlier here today. And as we're taking a look at flags at half-staff, yes, indeed, even here in the United States, our flags also have been lowered to mourn the death of Queen Elizabeth. After 70 years on the throne, of course, she has left behind many memories for people to look back on. Let's go ahead and bring you just some more into her life and into the royal family with our Fox 11 team.
This morning that Queen Elizabeth is under medical supervision. Doctors very concerned about her health at this point. This news comes just a day after the 96-year-old monarch canceled a meeting and was told by her medical team that she needed to rest. On Tuesday, the Queen met with the newly elected Prime Minister. This morning, the palace said the Queen is comfortable and does remain in Scotland, of course, adding...
All right, guys, obviously this coming just from earlier here today. You can see, though, those photos of the Queen meeting with the new United Kingdom, the British Prime Minister there, Liz Truss. Again, the Queen working up until the final days of her life. And what a life it was. We've been taking a little look back on all of those different historical events that the Queen has lived through. And, of course, there have been many to look upon. Let's go ahead and bring you just a little bit more with Fox's Martha McCallum as she is giving us a look inside of Queen Elizabeth's life.
Queen Elizabeth II was born into the royal Windsor family on April 21, 1926. At birth, as the oldest daughter of the Duke and Duchess of York and niece to the King, no one expected that little Elizabeth Alexandra Mary would one day be the longest serving and one of the most respected rulers of Great Britain. But a love story would transform her quiet country childhood into an altogether different destiny when Elizabeth's uncle, Prince Edward, abdicated as king to marry the American divorcee Wallis Simpson. Elizabeth's father reluctantly took the throne, becoming King George VI in 1936, making his oldest and then 10-year-old daughter Elizabeth his heir to the throne. At age 14, the homeschooled princess began to take on some royal duties. Her family was an outward expression of strength and resilience as England was battered by the Blitz in World War II. In 1945, at age 18, the young princess trained as a driver and mechanic in the Women's Auxiliary Service. She and her sister Margaret later joined those celebrating VE Day on the streets of London. Like thousands of others, she also had a sweetheart in the armed forces, her third cousin, Prince Philip of Greece. They were engaged to be married shortly after the princess's 21st birthday. The royal wedding held November of 1947 in London's Westminster Abbey. It brightened the gloom of those post-war years. The following year, the couple's first child, Charles, the Prince of Wales, was born. He was then followed by Princess Anne in 1950, Andrew in 1959, and Edward in 1963. But in 1952, while in Kenya with Prince Philip, Elizabeth learned the tragic news that her beloved father, the king, had died. In an instant, the 25-year-old became the Queen of England.
At my coronation, I shall dedicate myself anew to your service.
Elizabeth was to rule in a new era. Her coronation in all its splendor was the first to be broadcast on television, as millions around the globe watched the transformation as it happened. In 1957, Queen Elizabeth met President Eisenhower. She would go on to meet every U.S. president during her reign except Lyndon Johnson. she often spoke of the strong and vital bond between America and the UK. But with the 1990s came turbulent times for the royal family as the marriages of 3 of the Queen's children fell apart, all under the scrutiny of relentless TV coverage and tabloid headlines. Then, in 1997, Diana, Princess of Wales and mother to the Princes William and Harry, was killed in a car crash in France as she was hounded by the paparazzi. At the time, the Queen was criticized for her reserved response and persuaded to make an unprecedented live broadcast.
So what I say to you now, as your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart. First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being.
Over time, the monarchy's reputation rebounded. In April of 2011, the Queen attended Prince William's wedding to Kate Middleton, as some 2 billion people around the world watched the ceremony. She also made a historic visit to the Republic of Ireland, the first British monarch to do so in almost a century, a step toward healing a long and painful divide. The following year, the country turned out in force to celebrate Queen Elizabeth's 60-year reign, a Diamond Jubilee celebration spanning 4 days. Thousands lined the banks of the Thames as a flotilla of 1,000 boats, led by the Queen, made its way down the river. The worst of British weather tried but failed to dampen the mood, and the then 86-year-old Queen and 90-year-old Prince Philip stood side by side for the 4-hour ceremony. Queen Elizabeth ended the celebrations by thanking the nation for honoring her.
I will continue to treasure and draw inspiration from the countless kindnesses shown to me in this country and throughout the Commonwealth. Thank you all.
In 2013, the Queen welcomed her 3rd great-grandchild, the much-anticipated Prince George, son of William and Kate. Now, all these years later, another George is now 2nd in line to the British throne. His younger sister, Princess Charlotte, is 3rd. She was born in 2015, and later that year, Queen Elizabeth became Britain's longest-reigning monarch, overtaking her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. In 2016, the Queen celebrated her 90th birthday. That was a 4-day event, honoring the Queen's deep involvement with the armed forces and giving the nation a chance to celebrate her life. 2018, the Queen watched on as grandson Prince Harry married the American actress Meghan Markle in a ceremony that brought glamour and Hollywood royalty to the House of Windsor and led them firmly into the 21st century. But about a year later, Harry and Meghan would famously decide to leave the royal family, move to America, and give a tell-all interview to Oprah Winfrey, which caused deep divisions within the family. In 2021, the Queen's beloved husband, Prince Philip, died at the age of 99. The nation mourned with the Queen, but COVID restrictions kept the funeral small. The image of the Queen sitting masked and alone in the church became the image of a country both in mourning and in lockdown. But as she had so many times before, the Queen persevered. From an early age, Queen Elizabeth was one of the most recognized royals and recognized women in the world. Nearly 1/3 of the planet lived in the Commonwealth that she ruled. She managed to combine the truly regal with a countrywoman's simple pleasures, and she embodied old-fashioned values of virtue, faith, and self-restraint, honoring to the very end the pledge she had made when she was just 21.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
And thank you to Martha McCollum for bringing us that report. And now you can see at this Live Now look outside of Buckingham Palace, people are gathered outside there. It's now nighttime in London. And again, tributes are pouring in from around the world and across the pond as people are paying their respects to Queen Elizabeth II. She has died at the age of 96. And now this means that Charles, who will now reign as king, again will immediately become king. And again, we will continue to follow the latest developments. But now, with the death of Queen Elizabeth, this now means that there will be an official 10 days of mourning. And there will be a number of ceremonies that will take place in the aftermath of Queen Elizabeth's death. So definitely a sad time there in Britain, considering that Queen Elizabeth was in charge and in reign for 70 years. And we want to bring you some of the remarks that were made earlier today from political leaders from across the world. Moments ago, we heard from Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Here is what he had to say during his emotional remarks.
It is with the deepest of sorrow that we learn today of the passing of Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. She was our Queen for almost half of Canada's existence. And she had an obvious, deep, and abiding love and affection for Canadians. She served us all with strength and wisdom for 70 years as we grew into the diverse, optimistic, responsible, ambitious, and extraordinary country we are today. As her 12th Canadian Prime Minister, I'm having trouble believing that my last sit-down with her was my last. I will so miss those chats. She was thoughtful, wise, curious, helpful, funny, and so much more. In a complicated world, her steady grace and resolve brought comfort and strength to us all. Canada is in mourning. She was one of my favorite people in the world, and I will miss her so. C'est avec une grande tristesse que nous apprenons aujourd'hui du décès de Sa Majesté la Reine Élisabeth II. Elle était notre reine pendant presque la moitié de l'existence du Canada et elle avait une affection évidente et profonde pour tous les Canadiens. Elle nous a servi avec force et courage pendant 70 ans, pendant que nous sommes devenus le pays ambitieux, optimiste, diversifié, responsable, extraordinaire.
All right, so Trudeau there speaking in French, basically saying that she reigned for 70 years with ambition, but it's definitely a sad moment for the world. We also heard from Britain's new Prime Minister. Here are her remarks from earlier today.
We are all devastated by the news that we have just heard from Balmoral. The death of Her Majesty the Queen is a huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her. She ascended the throne just after the Second World War. She championed the development of the Commonwealth from a small group of 7 countries to a family of 56 nations, spanning every continent of the world. We are now a modern, thriving, dynamic nation. Through thick and thin, Queen Elizabeth II provided us with the stability and the strength that we needed. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. Her life of service stretched beyond most of our living memories. In return, she was loved and admired by the people in the United Kingdom and all around the world. She has been a personal inspiration to me and to many Britons. Her devotion to duty is an example to us all. Earlier this week, at 96, she remained determined to carry out her duties as she appointed me as her 15th Prime Minister. Throughout her life, she's visited more than 100 countries, and she has touched the lives of millions around the world. In the difficult days ahead, we will come together with our friends across the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and the world to celebrate her extraordinary lifetime of service. It is a day of great loss, but Queen Elizabeth II leaves a great legacy. Today the crown passes, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, our new head of state, His Majesty King Charles III. With the King's family, we mourn the loss of his mother, and as we mourn, we must come together as a people to support him, to help him bear the awesome responsibility that he now carries for us all. We offer him our loyalty and devotion, just as his mother devoted so much to so many for so long. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
All right, and now we want to show you a live now look outside of the White House. Flags have been lowered at half-staff to honor the life of Queen Elizabeth II. Again, this comes after she died at the age of 96. She reigned for 70 years. We're going to take a short break here on Live Now from Fox. We will bring you more top stories from across the world in just 2 minutes. All right, welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. We're following breaking news regarding the Mar-a-Lago case. The DOJ has appealed the special master decision. Live Now's Andrew Kraft has more regarding this. Andrew, can you tell us what exactly does this all mean?
Yeah, surely. So right now we're getting some breaking news in from the Department of Justice. You're looking at video from that August 8th FBI raid at Mar-a-Lago. So this is what we're learning. The DOJ is telling Judge Eileen Cannon, requesting that the judge grant a stay or delay to the special master process, or they are going to appeal. So